Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we're going to look at the Doge report, which is what's going on in the Tower of Power of Washington, D.C. What is Doge doing? Are you going to get your $5,000 check, or are you going to get zero? Are they going to reduce spending, or is this just all a joke? In other words, they think they're going to reduce spending, and they're not. Are they going to do increase taxes, or are they going to lower taxes, and we're back to the same problem with a huge debt that's layering over everybody's head that cost us almost $1 trillion a year. I think it's 892 billion going out just to pay interest on the debt. So with that, we need somebody who's sensible in Washington. Well, he lives near Washington and he's very sensible. And that is the former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker. David, hopefully you can give us some insights and make some sense out of the senselessness that we're hearing from Washington, D.C. It's like people running around with the chicken like their head cut off, no direction, no plan, a bunch of talking about reducing spending, but I don't see any concrete, hey, we're here, we're going to get there. And so what's going on in the city that you live in, and a place? I'm actually looking to buy a place in your area, by the way, because I believe housing prices are going to go down once they fire 100,000 people. So I'll have a place there shortly.
Well, let me know when you get my way. But in any event, and as you can see, I have on my NCAA basketball tournament Alabama coverall today. That this both the men and the women are still in the tournament. Let me give you an update. First, I think Doge is starting to lose momentum, and I think it's starting to lose momentum for several reasons. One, there are a significant number of suits that have been filed against, its actions or its recommendations that are going to have to be worked out through federal court. At a minimum, they're going to slow things down, things dealing with cancellation of certain contracts and whether or not you still have to spend the money, things having to do with reductions in force. And so these are going to have to play out through the courts. But the other thing is, as I've said all along, Doge is not doing an audit. Doge is doing a transactional review, which is a tactical action, trying to use artificial intelligence to identify possible or probable fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement through federal government information systems. They're identifying a number of items. They're canceling certain contracts. But the bottom line is that I think they finally found out that only Congress can cut spending. And the only thing that they can do that ends up reducing spending immediately is through hiring freezes and reductions in force. Because in the case of appropriations for programs, Congress gives both a ceiling and a floor. You can't spend more than this, but you must spend this, which is rather stupid, but that's the way it works right now. It needs to be reformed. But in the case of headcount, they give you a maximum, not a minimum. So to the extent that you don't use your maximum, you can end up saving payroll related cost. It's very clear that nothing was done on the continuing resolution dealing with this. It looks like that they're now deciding to try to focus on next fiscal year to try to be able to put some of the items that they want to end up, getting rescinded or whatever for next fiscal year rather than this fiscal year. But the other thing is there's a lot of debate about how much money are they really saving. And those of you who are familiar with X, formerly known as Twitter, which is owned by Elon Musk, X has a new artificial intelligence feature in it called Grok, Grok. And so I thought, well, gee, let me ask Grok how much money has Doge saved. And the bottom line, what Grok said, and literally this is the end of last week, Grok said that Doge claims that it saved $115 billion, but only 2 to 12 billion can be verified. Well, that's a hell of a gap between 2 and 12 and 115. And the bottom line is, as I've said all along, Doge is going to end up at best making a very modest dent in the huge fiscal gap that we have. And the real decisions are going to have to be made in cooperation with the Congress with regard to the reorganization of government, with regard to the reduction of spending in a number of different ways. And what I'd like to be able to do, at some point, Nick, is to be able to talk about what actually needs to be done, because I'm actually working with a small group of people to pursue a project that we're going to try to get funded through philanthropy of what actually really needs to get done to engage in a strategic transformation of the federal government, rather than a tactical transaction review, because the tactical transaction review may end up saving some money, but it is also reducing public trust and confidence in government. It is also further dividing Republicans and Democrats in Congress. And the fact is, as I said before, the big changes are going to require legislation, and any legislation that's going to pass and stand the test of time is going to have bipartisan support. So that's an overview, and I look forward to interacting further.
Yeah, I'm going to open up to the panel. I've got some construction going on in my office here, so we're going to bring in Jacoby, Sasha, and Rick. And Rick has a comment on the...
Yeah, you did it. You already did this once, David. When under Clinton, you reduced the federal workforce by 400,000 employees, which was like close to 20%. You did it you didn't do it like with this lightning fast shock and awe BS. You did it over a period of several years, but you balanced the budget, you reduced the deficit.
Well, when you're talking about I did it, you mean the country did it, and you're correct.
Yeah, but you were part of it. You were.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's most, I was there when we balanced the budget. I was there when a lot of this happened. But the thing that I'm more directly associated with is what we did at GAO. At GAO, when I came in, Congress was not happy with the agency. It had involuntarily downsized the agency 40% in the 5 years before I was there. It was going to downsize it another 25 to 40% if I didn't, quote unquote, turn it around. It had imposed a 5-year hiring freeze, which you don't do in a professional services organization. It creates all kinds of problems. So what I did, which quite frankly is what we ought to be doing throughout government, it's transferable and scalable. We developed a comprehensive strategic plan based upon current and future trends. We compared what we needed as compared to what we had. We identified where we were long, where we were short, where we had gaps. And then we went about rationalizing our footprint. We eliminated a third of our offices. We eliminated a layer of management. We consolidated 35 units into 13. We reduced our headcount voluntarily by 15%. We leveraged technology. We modernized our human capital practices. We did all of that, and we ended up increasing productivity 50 to 100%, tripled our outcome-based results. 95% positive rating from our client, the Congress, which is a difficult client, and second best place to work in the federal government. So it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And as I've said many times, the way that they're going about what they're doing now is not the right way, and that needs to change.
Power on. YouTube on.
Somebody speak.
I guess since nobody else is speaking, Dave, how's it going today? Alabama looks good.
Well, yeah, the women play tonight, and we'll see what happens. They look good this weekend. We'll see what happens.
The scary part.
Even UConn, I lived in Connecticut for 9.5 years. They gave Florida everything they could handle. They played very well, and the UConn women won, I think, like 103 to 30 something. I don't know.
All right, so I have a question for people who know more about sports than I do.
Yeah.
Where lately, now that the whole country is annoyed between blue states and red states, it's like, when I'm watching like teams from like Florida or Mississippi, I'm like, wait, why should I be cheering for a bunch of rednecks who probably voted opposite as I did? So then, even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, That is a pretty stupid way to be a sports fan. So set me straight. What do
There-
how do you?
Well, first, separate sports from politics, number one. And number two, don't assume that the players who are playing for, a college in the red part of the country or the blue part of the country are from that part of the country. There is aggressive recruiting that goes on all over the country. And so, you can't assume that the people that are playing for Alabama are from Alabama, or the people that are playing for California are from California.
Yep.
Yep.
And then on top of that,
Sorry, go ahead.
the transfer portals and all the other stuff. Caleb Love, who went off for Arizona last night, scoring his highest amount in the NCAA tournament. He was playing at Carolina 2 years ago. But yeah, definitely also remember, these are kids that are playing. These aren't, your average everyday 27, 28-year-old. No, these are kids that are from 18. Matter of fact, Duke has the youngest player at 17 in Cooper Flagg, who's a dominant player. Also, that's somebody you got to worry about, Dave. Duke actually looked.
Yeah, no, I know. We're in Duke's.
No, Duke looks really strong.
So Roll Tide, I want to ask some questions. I'm live here in Kissimmee, Florida at a huge event, ARTA Development Builders Timeshares. And we're going to interview some people. We actually know some of the people here, so we are going to be interviewing them. But let's talk about how a sports industry impacts the community. I mean, since how this is an economy show, I mean, all of this gets people up. They're spending money. The revenue is getting back into the community. I mean, because one of the things that Doge has done is they've kind of cut the throat in the major vein on generating revenue and circulating it when you mass layoff millions of people, because when you do a mass layoff, for every person you lay off, you impact 7 jobs under that. So, these sporting events, are they packed full, Jacoby? You've been at one or two.
Yes.
Yeah. So see, you're generating and you're circulating the economy with the revenue, and that's a good thing because people need that, and so that's really good. One of the things that has bothered me a little bit is the way we are spending the money that Doge is doing. Some of the things that they've been spending the money on. One is they used our tax dollars, and Trump lobbied to get those 2 sex offender, pedophile, sex traffickers back into our country from Romania. I don't know, maybe he felt like they were innocent, but flew them all the way back to Miami, Florida, where he met them that day. Of course, he said he wasn't going to meet them, but they flew in the same day he did. I keep up with that. That concerns me. That was a lot of money. And bringing back 2 pedophile sex traffickers, that bothers me. I mean, I would like some answers to this. He's looking at, I guess, pardoning the Epstein files. I don't know. I heard a rumor about that. That kind of concerns me. But when you take and do all the things that they're doing, just because you accomplish something doesn't mean you accomplished good. And sometimes when you cut the main vein to your revenue circulation, you're going to bleed out. You're not going to do good for the middle class people. And right now, what I see is them doing a lot of things for Elon. He got to fire all the people who were investigating him. He had 2 ships go up and blow up. That's not good. He's not due diligent with his money. He's not going to be due diligent with ours. So that's my concern.
First, sports is big business. Secondly, I think you have to keep in mind that the American people really focus on a short list of things rather than a lot of things that are going on in Washington. They
keep knocking me off.
On the economy. They focus on crime. They focus on macro issues, if you will. And you're right that to the extent that you have a significant number of layoffs, then that can have an adverse ripple effect. And as Nick said at the beginning of the show, that if you have a significant number of layoffs in a particular part of the country, let's say, for example, the Washington, D.C. area, then you can have an adverse impact not just on you know, the ripple effect with regard to businesses and things of that nature, you can have an adverse effect on the price of housing, because
Yeah.
it's all about supply and demand, right?
Yes.
And historically, the Washington area has been pretty much insulated from economic downturns because the government is such a big factor. It's not just government employees, it's contractors. I mean, contractors outnumber the government employees. But at some point, I want us to kind of turn to not what Doge is doing, but
That's what they're not doing.
what needs to be done. And maybe this is the good place to start with that. Look,
A good pivot.
yeah, as I said, Doge is taking a tactical and transactional approach using shock and awe. And what we really need to do is we need to step back and say, what is the federal government doing? How is it doing it? What is it trying to accomplish? How should we measure success? And after, what are the different tools that government has to try to accomplish the objectives that it wants to accomplish? And after doing that comprehensive analysis, then we're in a position to say what ought to be devolved to state and local government, what ought to be privatized, what ought to be consolidated, what ought to be reduced, what ought to be eliminated, and what ought to be expanded or enhanced, okay? But we're not going about it that way, okay? And to do that, in my view, what you do is the first thing you do is you start with the Constitution. And what was it envisioned that the federal government would do? Because keep in mind, as the Constitution says, the states were set up the federal government, not the other way around. And if it wasn't a duty that was given to the federal government, then it was supposed to be done by the states and by the people. But if you look at where we are today as compared to what was envisioned, the federal government's grown far beyond what the founders intended. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to go back to a minimalist approach, but at least it's a place to start to say what was originally intended, where are we now, why are we where we are, and what, if anything, ought to be reconsidered. And so the other thing you have to do is you have to look at the statutes that created all these department agencies, because when they were created, they had certain missions that they were supposed to be able to accomplish. And I can assure you from my direct experience that a lot of these agencies are doing a lot of things that were not envisioned as part of their mission. It's just mission creep, if you will. So we have to, look at that. We have to also look at, well, what are we trying to accomplish and how do we measure success? We need outcome-based indicators, economic, national security, foreign policy, domestic tranquility, safety, security, et cetera. We need those kinds of indicators to understand, what are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? How, on an outcome basis, how are we doing? Are we getting better or worse? And then very importantly, how do we compare to other countries? Because in many cases, we think we're doing great and we're really not doing great. And the biggest examples I can give you there right now are K through 12 education, where we're not top 25 in the world with outcomes, even though we spend more than anybody else in the world per person. And secondly, healthcare. The huge amount that we spend on healthcare, and yet our healthcare outcomes are below average for an industrialized nation. So that's a more strategic, comprehensive, integrated, outcome-based approach that I think needs to be undertaken. And I'm going to try to do my best working with a few other people to see if we can make that happen, within the next year or so.
I just want to come back to sports for a second because we did not do all that well. Actually got ousted in the first
we just
round
lost.
And everything, meaning my Marquette Golden Eagles. And one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't go down that transfer portal and all along those lines. And who knows, maybe Sasha Smart will change his mind about that. But they do have a good NIL agreement, the athletes do, and actually gave even some of their NIL, the Stars did, to some of the walk-ons in a kind of attitude of giving to those that were helping them in their training that weren't as skilled and didn't have as much of a possible future in the NBA and other places that they may be going as well and everything. But I was just wondering, from a Doge standpoint, how much should Doge be paying attention? Because we've talked on this show before, because y'all know that I work at a art gallery or an art center and everything along those lines. But how much should we be paying attention to sports in the sense of sports contracts and all along those lines? Because I know that even here in the Raleigh-Durham area, and that's kind of where I think Kim was going, that they made some significant amount of money at the Lenovo Center because it was a site of the NCAA tournament regionals, and a lot of people were spending their money, whether it was in the hotels, whether it was in the various restaurants and things. So definitely Raleigh had a good economic impact this particular weekend and everything. But I'm thinking that some of those things might be cut by Doge if they're having this kind of like chainsaw mentality and everything like that. So how much should Doge even be paying attention to the sports industry from a federal or even a local level? Because I know here in Durham, we've got a commission that deals with sports revenue and everything that is Durham based and everything along those lines. So how much should Doge turn that over to the...
I think most of the activity that's going on with regard to sports is really being done at the state and local level, not at the federal level. Okay. You mentioned about the arts, obviously that's something that the federal government does provide subsidies for. And so I think that's something that at some point in time we'll be taking a look at. But with regard to sports, that's not really something the federal government has been involved with in any significant manner. It's really more of a state and local issue. That's my understanding.
But I'm wondering about like the arenas, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was thinking that some of the arenas had to deal with federal contracts and all along those lines, because definitely even here, whether it's a cricket arena or whether it's some of the bigger arenas like in DC and stuff, I thought that they did have federal jurisdiction, but I could be wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time.
Not to my knowledge, Mark, not to my knowledge. Okay. Like, for example, here in the Washington area, the Washington Commanders, who used to be called the Washington Redskins,
right,
want to relocate their stadium. And there's a real debate about, where are they going to relocate to? Are they going to relocate to Washington, D.C.? Are they going to relocate to Northern Virginia? And the debate is where are they going to go? How much is it going to cost? And who's going to pay for it? But those debates with regard to the economics have really been more from the standpoint of state and local. To what extent is local government going to contribute? To what extent is state government? In part because of what was mentioned earlier. What's the economic benefit of having these stadiums going to be, right? The economic benefit, not just with regard to, ticket sales and renting the stadium, okay, but with regard to, the restaurants and other types of, activities, and undoubtedly will end up either already being there or will end up sprouting, around the stadium in order to be able to capture that business. That's clearly what happened with the Washington National Stadium. And they basically, took a piece of land that was really not developed very much at all, and now it's heavily developed. Not just with regard to restaurants and things of that nature, but also with regard to condos and apartments and things of that nature.
David, I have an issue with what Doge is doing. It's based on just basic economic and business principles. Number one, first thing you learn in business school is management by objective. Okay. And so if you have an objective, let's say the government is going to balance the budget in 1 year, then you have to manage toward that by reducing expenses, increasing revenue. But we know 1 year is unrealistic. So you do a 5-year plan. And 5 years might be unrealistic. Then you do a 10-year plan. It may be unrealistic. They may do a 15 or even a 20-year plan. Frankly, in my office in Salt Lake, we do that all the time. We run numbers for people's retirement plans. And I can tell them with guaranteed certainty what they're going to have when they reach age 62, 65, 70, 75. I mean, this is not rocket science. You can do the same thing with the government. And let's be easy. Do a 10-year plan to balance the budget. Then what you do, you reduce your expenses, increase your revenues, and you meet that objective at that point in time. As I'm sitting today, and people claim that Elon Musk is to be so smart. He said several things were incredibly stupid. Number one, he bought Twitter because he didn't know how many people watched it. After doing this media thing for like 5 years, I could have told him that. You can't, it's very hard to get verifiable views under today's computer programs. Problem number two, he said, I didn't know that the Social Security was a Ponzi scheme. I knew that when I was a kid. What are you, an idiot? You know, so he doesn't know some basic things, and he jumps into things like he knows what he's doing. Last thing, I have yet to hear from Washington, D.C., we have an objective in 10 years to balance the budget, and here's how we're going to do it. Okay, what I see coming from your great Washington, D.C. is what we call shooting from the hip. Let's get rid of this program. Let's get rid of that program. Let's get rid of, oh, look, we saved millions. Millions? No, you need billions. Well, let's save this billion, that billion. But you and Dave, you and I know it's not billions. We're talking $37 trillion problem. So what I see is, frankly, a bunch of so-called smart people doing incredibly stupid things with Doge. I am not impressed.
Well, let me react to that, and then Jacoby's got his hand up. Okay. First, Elon Musk is a brilliant person, but he knows nothing about government, and it should. Okay. Secondly, the people that he's hired may be very capable people from a technical standpoint, but they know nothing about government. Secretary of Treasury Bassett was on TV with, one of the Doge persons who was wearing a black T-shirt on national television with the Secretary of the Treasury. And it was obvious this guy didn't know anything about government. Okay. And I've said for a long time that they need somebody who's got direct government transformation experience to help them do what they're trying to do and to be able to prepare the way for the much tougher stuff that needs to be done that they can't do, that's going to require legislation that will end up requiring bipartisan support. The president has said that he wants to balance the budget in 3 years. That does not pass a straight face test. Okay. In addition, as you know, my argument is it's not about balancing the budget. It's about getting debt as a percentage of the economy down to a reasonable and sustainable level and be on a path to keep it there. It's too high already. It's headed to go a lot higher. And that's why I say, look, Doge is a modest first step. Okay. We've got to be able to do the more comprehensive review and reassessment, which I talked about a few minutes ago. We've got to have a statutory commission where everything is on the table, including mandatory spending, discretionary spending, tax preferences, et cetera. Everything's not equal, but everything's got to be on the table where they will make a set of recommendations for a tough up or down vote in Congress. And we've got to have a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt we can take on as a percentage of the economy. Those things are absolutely essential. And I'll come back to what I've said many times before. You assume we have a plan and we know what we're trying to achieve. We don't have a plan, and we have not set key outcome-based indicators, which in my view is management 101. And we've been in business since 1789. I would argue it's time to adopt some management 101 principles.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. In other words, management 101 is you have a plan and then you achieve.
We're in agreement.
And you articulate the plan, and I see that from purportedly smart individuals who basically, if you do look at Elon Musk, I'm sorry, he won the lottery. I mean, the thing is, he gambled pretty heavy on Tesla, and he could have gone broke, David. I mean, I've seen a lot of people like him just go down the toilet, but he won the lottery.
SpaceX, and he had PayPal, and he's had,
Yeah, and SpaceX, SpaceX was funded by the federal government. I mean, you just sit there and you're going like, let's get real. This guy did play pretty good, the hand that was dealt him, but also, I hate to say it, he got lucky, and you can't beat luck being at the right place at the right time. But now let's just go to the people that actually run things. First of all, if you're going to run a small or big business, you have a plan. Okay. Not to have a plan means you're shooting by the hip. Who's shooting the hip? Elon Musk and the Doge crowd. They applaud when they cut, things out that save $1 million here or $1 million there, but they have no objective as to where they're going and how they're going to get there. And I'm not being critical. I'm being hypercritical, because these people are purportedly smart people, and smart people know that you have a plan and you actually head toward the plan and you do run models that get you there. And they know how to do that. And if they don't, they do like I do. I hire actuaries. By the way, actuaries are good. They'll beat the trash out of Musk and his mathematics. I am not kidding. Enrolled actuaries are the smartest people in the world. And they'll run the numbers and show you how to get it. They're horrible with people, though. Don't expect them to articulate anything. But they will be able to run the numbers and get you where you want to go. I don't see any actuaries involved in this whole process. Not surprising. So you got just a bunch of political hacksters hacking away. Rick, you have a
becoming an actuary is
always next after Rick. Okay.
Becoming an actuary is freaking brutal. I started that whole program, and it's advanced statistics followed by a series of 10 different exams. So,
it's the most difficult professional credential, in my opinion, and it has the lowest pass rate of any of the major professions.
That is absolutely correct. There's less than 4,000 people in the United States that are enrolled actuaries. They work for my firm, so I know I hire them to go to these crazy actuarial meetings.
Do you think there are any actuaries in Doge out of these?
No, I don't think there's any actuaries that work in Doge. But the thing is, what they are is if you ever work with them, they're very mathematically precise. And you're right, Rick. It's harder to pass than the bar exam. It's harder to pass than the CPA exam. To pass the exam, the hardest in the world. So most people don't pass it. But if you had actuaries there, they could actually get you where you want to go. And there's plenty of actuaries in the Washington, D.C. area that could sit there and crunch those numbers and get you where you want to go in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. They do it all the time for my firm. Some of them, they love that stuff. I hate it. They love it. They'll swim it. They'll show you this is the revenue you need to raise. This is how much you have to decrease. Yet all I hear is it's a political hack job. And so he brought out what is the crazy, saw, whatever that thing is. And so that's all showmanship. It doesn't get you where you want to go. So, and
that's what Trump has been about for a while. But it would
give you 3 minutes to talk about Doge, or less than 3 minutes. You talk about it in 30 seconds. You can't. This is a $6 trillion plus industry with a $37 trillion deficit. You need more than 3 seconds on CBS to discuss it. Yes, Jacoby.
I mean, you had a lot to get off your chest, Nick.
I'm just complaining. That's all, because I'm frustrated because Doge isn't doing their job.
Well, Doge was never set up to do its job. Doge was the same thing as everything else that is put before us at this moment, because there was Dave. We completely agree. There was never a plan. There's no plan there. I completely agree with you when you were talking about earlier that we need to figure out what we are supposed to be and figure out how to get there, because we have no idea. And what we have done as an electorate is fall for the show. We fell for the idea that, Trump on ABC was a businessman. We fell for that show. He was never a good businessman outside of the show. Even the directors pointed that in. Elon Musk is the smartest man in the world. He was never the smartest man in the world. He just got lucky at business.
By the way, Rick has a higher IQ.
Exactly.
But I screw up as much as Musk. It's just on a smaller scale.
So Elon bought Tesla. He didn't design anything but the Cybertruck, and the Cybertruck has fallen apart and is actually a piece of trash. He didn't do anything with space because he tried to come at different astronauts, and the astronauts told him he had no idea what he was talking about. It's actually the people at SpaceX. He jumped into businesses that had no competition, which were SpaceX, because actually SpaceX was leading in that department before anybody else jumped in there. Tesla was leading the electric market before anybody else did. When he jumped into a crowded field of Twitter, he lost money because he did not know how to manage the actual department. And he tried to manage it because he said that he was a smart guy, and it failed. And so Starlink, same thing. Cyber, global internet. Yeah, that's still a department that nobody else is in. But now he's actually eating up the market, and when more people jump into it. So I say all that to get all the Elon Musk and the Doge crap out of the way, because Dave, I'm with you. We need to think about what we're going to do now, because we have a major problem from the cutting of DOE, which is going to affect everybody. From people with IEPs, because Linda McMahon does not know the education department. She was put there to close it down. So she was liquidating the area more so than actually improving the area. So from all these departments, and this is where we have to look at, what's going to happen next, because I believe, and I think, Dave, you can agree with me, because I would love to hear your response to it. The Republican Party is completely lying to the American public when they say they're going to make these cuts without touching Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and the Defense Department.
Yeah.
So they cannot make the cuts that they are asking to do or saying that they're going to do without going to these. Dave, what say you?
Well, that's a lot of stuff. Okay, first, what they say they're going to do with regard to Doge is that they're focusing on, quote unquote, fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. A vast majority of what they found so far represent policy priority differences. In other words, things that were priorities for the Biden administration, but are not priorities for the Trump administration. And so therefore they want to discontinue them, cancel them, whatever else. Okay. They are looking at, they've reserved the right to look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, to the extent that it deals with fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement. And the truth is, Jatovi, there's a lot of fraud in healthcare. Okay. I mean, if you look at the improper payments reports, and the estimates of fraud that are done by inspector generals and that are done by the Government Accountability Office, there's more in healthcare than any place else. So to the extent that they're looking for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, that's one thing. But here's the point: we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, but it will never be zero. And the gap that we have between revenues and expenditures is $2 trillion a year and growing. And the only way that you're going to be able to close that gap is through growing the economy, okay, reforming mandatory spending programs, reprioritizing and reducing projected discretionary spending, and engaging in tax reform that will generate more revenues as a percentage of the economy than we're getting right now, we're projected to get. You got to do all of that, all right? And the other thing that people have to understand is it's one thing to say, I'm not going to touch Social Security, but if you don't touch it, in 8.5 years, everybody's benefits get cut 21%. I don't know anybody who's for that, right? But they don't want to end up making the tough choices until they're at the cliff, and then they end up doing things that, quite frankly, should have been done years before and could have been done in a lot more intelligent, manner if it had been done years before. So that a little bit of thoughts about that. Rick, I know you've had your hand up in Mark.
Yeah, so fraud and waste is built into healthcare. You need to take some suckers for big money to pay for everybody else. The person who shows up needs 2 stitches in the emergency room, done in 15 minutes, $6,500. Now, some people will be able to negotiate that down, but you need some people to pay the ridiculous amounts to sustain. It's all like everybody gets quoted a crazy price, and the people who know what they're doing or have some leverage get to knock the price down. But it's a crazy way to do business where everybody gets their ass kicked at first and then has to negotiate the price to a reasonable point.
Well, let me say 2 things about that, then we'll go to Mark, okay? First is, you may know, I had a terrible automobile accident on December 14th, and I was lucky to survive it. I spent a day and a half in the hospital one night. I was in the emergency room, which you referred to, for about 8 hours. And when I got the bill for the stay, one night, no surgery. When I was in the emergency room, they didn't do anything other than give me some blankets to keep me warm because I was very, very cold. The reaction to the wreck, when the bill came, it was $36,400. Okay. Well, having been a former trustee of Medicare, I called up the hospital and said, "This is outrageous. I know they're going to get crammed down. How much they're going to get crammed down, I don't know, but I'm looking forward to it." But keep in mind this, Rick: for any system to be successful and sustainable, whether it's a healthcare system, an education system, a tax system, an immigration system, you fill in the blank. You got to have three things. You have to have properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. You've got to have adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that they will do the right thing and they won't do the wrong thing. And thirdly, you've got to have appropriate accountability if they don't do the right thing, and recognition if they do. And guess what? For the things that I just mentioned, we're 0 for 3. That's called a strikeout. So that's why we got a problem, and we have to go back to the fundamentals and relook at, just like we do for the government that Jacoby talked about before. I mean, we've got to go back and get back to basics. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? And how are we doing as compared to that, if you will? I think, Mark,
one more thing. One more quick thing. Rick Scott, one of Florida's two senators,
he was
participated. He was the administrator of what was maybe the biggest Medicare fraud in U.S. history, where they got fined $1.7 billion or something. And he, as CEO, he made a couple $100 million off of this craziness, and he used it to get elected. So we've got one of the biggest Medicare fraudsters in history as one of the 100 most powerful men in America.
Well, there's only 2 requirements to run for office. You got to be a certain age, and you got to live a certain place. And maybe that's one of the problems.
Either that, or you got to be in trouble, I think, as well. Maybe that's a new requirement and everything like that. But just really quickly, because you kind of alluded to it, but I just wanted your take if you were in charge of Doge. Because one of the things that we're hearing a lot about is this notion of privatization and people that have been in government for a long time as non-private entities becoming now run by private corporations. I think that there's even talk about the U.S. mail service, and some people think that it's very efficient. Some people think that it's not all that efficient and everything, as well as the prison system and even the IRS and everything. So I just wanted your take on this notion of severe cuts in those areas, and whether we need to go and have them run by private entities, which is what is being proposed by some of these Doge cuts.
I think, well, first, Doge is not in a position, nor is President Trump in a position to unilaterally privatize anything. That would clearly require legislation, for example, the Postal Service. I do believe that the consideration of privatizing the Postal Service will be on the table. This is not something that's the first time that's been talked about. There are other countries who have privatized their postal system. Off the top of my head, I think Germany is one of them that's done it. The Postal Service, I would respectfully suggest, is not very efficient. Okay, based upon my personal experience, you may have a different experience. It's also losing its keister big time every year. I heard recently they were thinking, under the past administration, they were thinking about buying new postal trucks that were going to cost like $150,000 each, because they were going to be all electric or whatever. I don't know. Maybe they were going to be, like the Tesla trucks or something like that. I don't know. But so I think there will be circumstances in which consideration will be given to how best to accomplish this objective. Now, as you know, in the Constitution, it does envision that there will be a postal service. And there's a lot of politics involved with the postal service. For example, do we need delivery 6 days a week, or would 5 days a week work? Okay. In addition, do we need as many post offices as we have today? Because there's huge excess infrastructure for the postal service, which not only results in additional cost, we lose an opportunity to be able to sell that land and have it developed where you could get asset value out of it. Sasha hasn't been able to say anything yet, and he's got his finger up, and it looks like it's a proper finger. So we'll recognize Sasha next.
Thank you, David. You just mentioned Germany, and I'd like to take an international perspective of what's going on. Germany last week has approved a military budget of 1 trillion euros. It exceeds by far United States military budget, if you know. And the other countries are now raising their budget. And what's interesting is that the new aircrafts which they will buy will not be F-35. There will be European production aircrafts, namely Rafale, Typhoon, and Swedish maker Gripen, I think.
Yeah.
That's it. Maybe they're not so good as F-35, but they're quite capable, each one of them.
Teeth whitener and
they're cheaper by far than F-35, and there is no danger that US at its whim could completely unplug their software support or so on, which will make them just a bunch of metal without that. So although Pentagon reassured European countries that it's not the case and they have not have the capability to unplug, but who knows? They do or they don't, or they can unplug only part of the software system or so on. It's not good in either case. Right now, U.S. is conducting peaceful negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. And what I've noticed is that the U.S. negotiator, Mr. Witkov, he is spreading the Putin's lie word per word, is that there were referendums in the 4 regions of Ukraine that Russia wants to take over, that people voted they want to be in Russian sphere of influence and live in Russia rather than Ukraine. It was not such a referendum. There was attempt to hold the referendum under the guns of Russian soldiers. It was basically boycotted by Ukrainian people. There is no need for Mr. Witkov as a straight representative of Trump, and therefore Trump now either has to confirm Witkov's lies or he has to distance himself from Witkov and correct him that no, that's not such a case. There were attempts to hold the referendum, but they were not held, at least not to international standards, and it's quite obvious. So this is very painful situation that all that is self-inflicted damages on US upon itself, because nobody had to screw the international policy which has been around since 1945 and try absolutely radical, ridiculous new foreign policy. And here is a back time. It's happening very quickly. And as you know, Europeans are preparing a new incredible armed forces to defend Ukraine and Europe itself, because I understand that the US is not a choice, not a first choice for sure, to think about defending Europe or so on, especially that there was already order to move all US armed forces, about 160,000 from Germany to where? Hungary, guess what? And in Hungary, it will be rather on the Russian side in case of a conflict than on European side. This is
yeah.
an incredible situation.
Let me mention several things. One, you said that Germany voted to spend $1 trillion. Is that in 1 year? Oh, not trillion euros. In 1 year?
What I understand is in 1 year, because if it
Yeah.
would be over, it's a budget.
Yeah, let's look at that, because that doesn't pass a straight face test. So let's look at that. Let's look at that. Secondly, I believe that Europe needs to spend more on defense. Okay, there's no question about that.
David, hold on. Trump proposed 5%.
Yeah, I understand.
GDP.
I understand.
Okay, wait a sec. But if European countries can afford to spend 5% on the defense, why the hell they need US?
No. And I'm not saying 5% is the right number either. Okay, but as compared,
US spends slightly over 3%.
we spend about 3.7. Okay, but my point is this. My point is this. They need to be spending more than they're spending. Okay. Secondly, Germany was never going to buy F-35s. There are a number of European nations that are buying F-35s. One example is the Netherlands, as an example. Okay.
Denmark.
Yeah, Denmark is one. I think UK is too. But the other thing is that one of the things that's happening is the U.S. wants to shift a lot of its military capabilities to Asia because it views that the greatest threat looking forward is in Asia, and you've got a number of major countries in Europe that have the ability to defend themselves with our support, okay, because we're still a member of NATO, right? But there's not as much out west, okay? You've got Japan, you want to call it the East. Japan, you've got Australia, but that's really about it, right? And so we're right, the ROC, right, and they've got strong forces, right?
Oh, India also joined one of the alliances.
Right, but India, you don't know exactly where India is. That's a different story, okay? But my point is, the general view is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just, the general view is that the U.S. needs to shift more to the Pacific, okay? And that by itself means that Europe needs to do more, okay? But we need to maintain our commitment to NATO. There's absolutely no question about that. And as I've told you before, I think in the end, what's likely to happen in Ukraine is Ukraine will become part of the EU. It won't become part of NATO, but there will be peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. And maybe there'll actually be a treaty, because we all know what happened with the Budapest Agreement. It was not honored. The only thing that really that binds current and future presidents and Congresses is a treaty. So if they want something that's going to provide real security, it needs to be a treaty.
All treaties also can be broken. I don't.
They can, but they're but much less likely, right? I mean, agreements are like worth the paper that they're on.
There is only one way for Ukraine to guarantee its independence. It's 1.5 million strong Ukrainian army, equipped to the teeth, help from European countries, US if possible, although with what Witkoff is doing, he is selling Ukraine. He is doing and discussing 90% on the time what they're spending with Russians. They're discussing different business ventures, how to use Gazprom, how to use this. Maybe 10%, if probably even less, they spent on the peace in Ukraine. That's not where Trump, Witkoff, and all those people are making money. No, they're trying to think that they can make money in Russia. That's not the case. They're not going to make even 1 penny in Russia because Russian oligarchs are being greedy as they are. They will allow Americans to come in, and they will do the same what they do to Chevron and to Exxon and everything. They took their property out in 24 hours. The end of story.
Well, hopefully the president's press secretary will clarify the issue that you talked about the referendum, the fact that there was no bona fide referendum, because that's an excellent point. It's one thing if you have a vote and you got a gun at your head. That's not a real vote.
Yeah, but that's how U.S. Witkov.
Yeah, well,
that's how they discredit themselves, repeating Putin lies.
Yeah.
Who told him to repeat Putin's lies? He did it on his own to please Trump.
Just a point of clarification, David. Point of clarification. Looks like it was the European Union that approved 897 billion, which is almost $1 trillion, spread over 4 years, to be spent on.
Well, that's over 4 years, and it's the whole European Union, not Germany. So
that is correct. Right? Germany doesn't have that.
I don't know. Really, the way you got to look at it is not in nominal value. You have to look at it as percentage of GDP. I don't know what percentage of GDP that is. I don't know how it compares to what they're supposed to be doing.
Europe is number 3. The European Union is number 3 behind the U.S. and China. Even though they have more people, we have 433 million people. Our GDP per person isn't as great as it is over in the United States.
Yeah.
Oh, and with that, unfortunately, with the hour, so we're going to have to go. And somewhere along the line, I'm going to have to talk to Kim as to where our exit went. Our whole Monday thing disappeared from the internet, so I'm using a different one. But we'll see you next week on economics.
Be good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.